All right, I'd like to open this segment by reminding you to check out the Patriot Freedom Project. The Patriot Freedom Project provides support to those being politically persecuted and their families. I'm talking about J6ers here primarily. When Gene was with us, we talked about Peter Navarro, potentially Steve Bannon, Donald Trump. But let's not forget there's over 1,400 other political prisoners right now. So go to patriotfreedomproject.com to learn more and give your support. Our next guest is an Army Reserve veteran who was recently released from jail after spending nearly 3 years incarcerated for nonviolent offenses on January 6th. He's a returning guest. His name is Tim Hale. He's rejoining us here on State of the Nation for his thoughts on the status of the J6 defendants. Tim, welcome back to State of the Nation. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me back, Ryan. I really appreciate it. It's a great opportunity.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. We're really pleased you're here with us. So Tim, let's take a look at this clip of Tom Cotton on Meet the Press. Go ahead and roll it.
Another place you had a disagreement on that day, January 6th, you called the people who attacked the Capitol insurrectionists and said, quote, they should face the full extent of federal law. What message is Donald Trump sending by promising to pardon these people in a second term?
Well, Peter, I use the same term to describe the BLM rioters and the Antifa rioters from the previous summer. I've long said that anyone on January 6th who attacked a law enforcement officer or damaged public property should face legal consequences. But
Donald Trump's not making that distinction, though. So should he pardon those individuals as well?
He absolutely has. There are
hundreds. No, he hasn't,
yes,
sir.
He has,
He has
Peter.
not.
There are hundreds, Peter. There are hundreds of people who were at the Capitol or even outside the Capitol that day who did not attack a law enforcement officer, who did not damage public property, who are facing more time in jail than the crimes for which they are charged, many of whom are about to have their convictions erased by the Supreme Court.
To be clear, though,
compare the techniques the Department of Justice used to pursue the BLM rioters or these Democratic street militias outside the Supreme Court.
Let me get back to the question, though. You disagree with the president on this. The president to Time magazine in the last several weeks said that he would consider pardoning all of them. You would disagree with that,
Well, there's
correct?
a difference between saying he would and saying he would consider it. I think
should he pardon all of them by your standard of what's appropriate?
Peter, he should evaluate each case on the merits,
including the 4 who were convicted of seditious conspiracy,
which is what he did when he was present the first time. And anyone who is charged with silly misdemeanors about parading on public grounds without a permit, who did not attack a law enforcement officer, who did not damage public property, their pardon should be considered. In many cases, I would say it should be granted because many of them, frankly, are about to have their convictions or their charges erased by the Supreme Court in just a few weeks.
To be clear, you're making a distinction that Donald Trump has not publicly.
Wow. Meet the Press, always adversarial. Tim, what's your response to that? I mean, you didn't attack any police or anything. You were there in a nonviolent fashion, and you ended up having to give up a portion of your life to incarceration over this. What do you say to this?
Well, that's a very good observation that I spent 3 years incarcerated for one felony, which is the very felony that's about to get tossed out by the Supreme Court, God willing. That's what we hope for. It's what we suspect. But I actually don't disagree with what he said. I think every case should be on a case-by-case basis. And I would even make that distinction. This is my personal opinion. I would make that distinction even for misdemeanor cases. And the reason is I think every case needs to be looked at very carefully because I don't want anybody getting a pardon if they were there as a federal informant, regardless of what their charges were. I think that people should be pardoned based on their intent, what their actual intent was, the mens rea, like what was actually in their head at the time. Did they go there, get out of hand? Did they go there, get entrapped? Did they go there and defend themselves? Or did they go there to get other people in trouble or to get President Trump in trouble? I think that's a big deal. And the reason it's a big deal is because if you, God forbid, you do a blanket pardon and you pardon everybody and you actually let a lot of, let's say, federal informants off the hook, you're just setting a precedent for the feds to do this to him and us all over again. This is just going to keep happening. This is going to become the norm. It's already almost the norm because of how they've already weaponized this. But going forward, we don't need to create any more legal precedents for these false flag narratives. We just don't need more of it. So I would caution, as much as everybody wants to be like a patriot and be like, just pardon like, yeah, people deserve pardons, but it should be on an individual case-by-case basis. I think that, again, this is me. We know how much the narrative has been manufactured. We know they set those guys up in Michigan, that kidnapping plot. There's no telling how infiltrated this whole setup was. So, it's not to cast doubt on, the intentions of everybody who was there, but we really do need to be very careful about this. It's the only way we're going to find out the truth.
Yeah, there's no way of telling how infiltrated it was because the Department of Justice says that it doesn't even know how many feds were there. It said that under oath. So there's that. I keep coming back to two pieces of video. One of two groups of people, one dressed as Trump supporters and others dressed in all black bloc. Where have we seen that before? Getting off buses and staging at the East Capitol grounds early in the morning, 6 a.m. And then the other piece of video was captured by our good friend, independent journalist and Marine Bobby Powell, of one of those young men in black bloc bashing in a window on the east facade of the Capitol porch, being pulled back by actual Trump supporters, smashing into the window. He was detained by police, the guy in black bloc, but then mysteriously, a sergeant of Capitol Police comes up, a short black woman, very rotund, came up, told all the Capitol Police officers to get in a line against the wall, and off they trotted back into the Capitol. And as we found out later, Tim, that thug in black bloc that was bashing in the window, he was released, no charges.
And that's not very unique, unfortunately. I'm fairly certain I know who you're talking about. What's interesting is that the sedition hunters, they're not really interested in a lot of these people. Like that, I recently saw one of their Twitter accounts. They just created a hashtag. They put out the hashtags for all the different people they find. They waited 3 years to do this, though. These people aren't really trying to find these people. They burn certain assets when they find, when people ask too many questions or just to have numbers. And yeah, unfortunately, that's unfortunately, that's not the only instance. When we were in the DC jail, we had video we found of actual police officers that were dressed in all black. They were dressed like Antifa, and they actually got stopped on the street by other cops asking for their ID, and they had to pull out their badge. I don't want to poison the well here, but it's a little late for naivete. We know that they had DHS. Recently, they said that the CIA admitted they had deployed assets there that day. The BOP, the Bureau of Prisons, had assets there that day. And I was in jail with Antifa. I know that there were Antifa that are posing as Trump supporters and January 6th defendants. Unfortunately, yeah. I can take I could make an educated guess and say this percentage is cooperating or an asset or a plant or what have you. There's no way for me as a layman to know. We have to get the DOJ back, and the only way we're going to do that is with President Trump back in office. And again, I would caution looking at everything very carefully, because you're right. How many times have we had these hearings? How many feds do we have in the crowd on January 6th? I can't answer that question. I'm afraid I can't answer that question. It's like that. I don't know how that's even an option, but unfortunately, that's the truth. And we know what that means. We know exactly what that means. It means there were a lot. Yeah, too many.
Exactly. And like you said, from multiple agencies you wouldn't even expect. Tim, hold the line. We got a headline we're going to take. We'll come back, pick up right here on State of the Nation. This is TNT.
Now,
I've got good news and bad news.
TNT Radio News.
For TNT, this is James O'Neill. The FDA recommended on June 3rd that the formulation of COVID-19 vaccines be updated due to studies showing decreased effectiveness against current SARS-CoV-2 variations. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu stated on June 1st that Israel's conditions for ending its conflict with Hamas remain unchanged. 5 candidates are vying for the Republican nomination to challenge 6-term incumbent Representative Dina Titus in Nevada's 1st Congressional District.
Why not give TNT Radio a follow? We're on all major social platforms, including Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Gab, and Getter. Help us get the word out as we cover the biggest topics of our time right here on today's News Talk. TNT Radio. TNT Radio.
Now, Tim, I love what you're saying here. The idea of a blanket pardon sounds great to a lot of people who have been very concerned for everybody there. But some of these programs that we're talking about, we need the actual discovery appropriate charges and appropriate evidence for every single person involved at this point. We even need to hear their stories of what other people have said to them, or maybe tried to get them to say while they're incarcerated, because it seems like there may even be some confidential informants inside the prison, perhaps. I think we'd be remiss if we didn't, look at that as a possibility. But these programs potentially have been going since Obama's era. That's when Antifa started showing up. So, to me, it's like, yeah, what you're saying is definitely the way to go. So, I mean, is that not one of the biggest, this lack of discovery and individual charges and cases, is that one of the biggest legal and political challenges faced by January 6 defendants, in your view?
Yeah, I mean it's twofold. Yeah, of course, the obvious hurdle is just that the system is broken in and of itself. We have to fight these laws like the 1512 charge that don't even apply. But yeah, then you have the deeper layer of the onion, which is how orchestrated was all of this? And I think we know it's very orchestrated. Yes, I mean it's hard to quantify the exact amount, but yeah, I mean this is, I'm going to say, and again, everybody's kind of like in their own situation, but me, now that I'm out, after all the stuff I was doing in there, watching video, trying to do as much research as I can, and just being around a lot of suspicious people, yeah, my main priority is making sure that this doesn't happen again. And that means we got to identify who the assets were that day and who became an asset afterwards. Because you never know at what point people started, being assets, cooperating, or what have you. And there's a lot. So, I mean, it's very pertinent that we figure this out.
And I think we need to have an even bigger conversation, and that's whether the nation even needs a federal bureau of investigation, or, all of the other executive departments have their own law enforcement function. Gosh, even EPA is armed to the teeth since Obama. And yet we're building them a brand new campus out in Maryland. It seems as though we're rewarding them for what's more than bad behavior. What really is chipping away at the foundations of our republic.
What's funny is, like, I remember when Snowden came out, Edward Snowden, and he, revealed a lot of stuff like what the NSA was doing, and the public was outraged and like, oh, they're out of control. The NSA is doing all this stuff they're not supposed to be doing. And then, but I just think to myself, nobody really even knew about the NSA before that. How many people even thought about it? It suddenly, the NSA became a household name, Yeah, I mean, personally, I think all these three-letter agencies are just highly excessive. You have, I mean, again, we don't even know how many of them were present on January 6th, but I mean, I would actually, to the point before about going back to Obama, I would say it goes back much farther. I would say if you look at Operation Mockingbird, or the FBI's COINTELPRO, counterintelligence programs. These programs, like we look at the Church Committee and these kinds of things, like these things get revealed and they say, we're sorry, we were bad boys. And then they'll slap on the wrist and they end these programs. I don't think they ever really end. I think they just repackage them or rename them. And so all this stuff it's never ending. And so I think a lot of these agencies that keep doing this stuff just need to go. That's my opinion. I understand why we want an intelligence apparatus, a defense apparatus. But when you're at the point where in order to maintain your system, you need to entrap a third of your population, it's really unsustainable and unacceptable. And then, yeah, I mean, we go on and on. I could tell you about all the people all the suspicious actors, even after I was arrested, that were trying to get defendants in trouble, trying to set them up and sabotage their cases. It never ends at the PSYOP. It never ends at the false flag. It never ends at the color revolution. It just keeps going on and on. It never stops. It's like perpetual prey, or predation. So yeah, I mean, I don't know how if you want me to go deeper into the kind of actors that were in there and what the feds would have people do to further their narratives, but it's a lot more complicated than people think. There's a lot more going on behind the scenes, even behind the bars.
Yeah, we absolutely do. Let's dig a little deeper on that. Tell us some of the things that you experienced while locked up, and just adding on to what you were saying there. If if so many things have gone wrong, we look at Operation Northwoods, MK Ultra, PatCon, all these things, and if J6 is another thing that gets added on top of that, I mean, the argument is done. The argument is done. These agencies are being used in exactly the way that you're describing, and still to this day, and Project Mockingbird, we can see that 24/7 in the mass media cartel. That was illustrated to us very well in 2020 through COVID and through all of these political events. But yeah, tell us a little bit about what happened while incarcerated.
Sure. There was well, first off, let me go back to what I said. Like there were Antifa there that day. One of the guys, his name was Zach Alam. He's actually the guy who broke the window where that woman, Ashley Babbitt, got shot. He broke that window. He was Antifa. He actually changed outfits twice inside the Capitol building, both times in front of the cops. And so, I mean, it is what it is. Just because someone's a defendant doesn't mean that they were a Trump supporter or they were there for the right reason. So, people want to contradict that. They can try. But I have the testimony of everybody that was in the jail there with me. There were Antifa. You had people. I'm not sure if I mentioned this the last time. The 1512 itself was first upheld in federal court for federal informants like Nathan DeGrave and Ronald Sandlin. Ronald Sandlin said that his co-defendant DeGrave was caught in a drug conspiracy back in 2020. That's why they were really at the Capitol, to get out of it. These aren't my words. These are their words. I heard it. And then the other guys who were in the jail signed a statement saying this, and I have it. But I mean, going further than that, there was a guy in there who was pretending to be a U.S. Army colonel. He was an older man. It turns out he was a career criminal. He was there as an informant who, in his own words, to destroy the Oath Keepers. He volunteered to testify against a defendant named Guy Reffitt, and he also tried to sabotage my case. He repeatedly tried to use incendiary language to get people to talk about assassinating politicians, which is exactly what he was charged with. You think that's the last thing he'd be talking about, but yet he gets time served after a year of trying to set people up unsuccessfully. There was another guy there who basically tried to get me to talk about Timothy McVeigh to try to set me up as the next Oklahoma City bomber. You had another guy in there as the first guy I met on Con Air. He was accused of trying to start a militia to overthrow the government after January 6th. And all he does inside the DC jail is try to enlist specifically the veterans and the Oath Keepers into that militia. That same militia, it turns out he ended up in someone else's paperwork. So the evidence there isn't mounting, but it's kind of obvious that it is what it is. He was especially trying to get the Oath Keepers who were, you heard that clip about seditious conspiracy. The Oath Keepers, just like the Proud Boys, were charged with seditious conspiracy. So what is he trying to do? He's trying to get the Oath Keepers to confess to being seditionists. And it's cool. And so, I mean, this is, I mean, unfortunately, here's the thing, like there's this January 6th community we're in, but like everybody wants everybody wants to seem united and not divisive. So people don't really talk about this, but this was my experience. And that's the truth. There's a lot of bad actors. And again, there's a lot of nuance here, a lot of moving parts. There were cops that were out of control on January 6th. There were agitators in the crowds who were trying to make the cops out of control. There's all kinds of stuff happening that day, and the same is true inside the jail. You had people who might have been there for the right reason, but maybe they sold out afterward because they wanted a slap on the wrist. You had people who were there for the wrong reasons, and that was still their motivation in the jail. Some of them took cooperation agreements and walked right out the jail. You had another guy, Sam Lazar. He was there with Ray Epps. When they had knocked those barriers over, he was on a bullhorn taking orders from Ray Epps. He took a cooperation agreement. I met him in prison. He tried to get information out of me. I had to protect another defendant that I was in the prison with because he was trying to ask us questions. Turns out my intuition was right. I recognized him, but he had face paint on. So I think his Sedition Hunter hashtag is face paint blowhard or whatever. But I met that dude without the face paint, and I immediately, like, the hair on my skin just went up. I'm like, I net this dude's not right. And I was right. He actually basically walked out of prison right after that because he had a cooperation agreement. It's hard to know when exactly it starts and ends, but I do know that there's a lot of bad actors. We've all got bad we've all got we've all got bad media coverage, but I mean that doesn't mean that it's any less pertinent. It's any less important that we actually dig through each case and find out what were people really doing there. I was in a suit and a tie. I was there to hear a speech. I didn't know barriers were knocked down, and yeah, I got a little mad when they started spraying us. But it's not one size fits all. There were 1,400 people plus have been charged, but there were a lot more people that were there. So, I mean, we can't attribute one motivation to everybody.
Absolutely. Absolutely, sir. Tim, we're just about out of time. I'm going to shout out patriotfreedomproject.com. Once again, you can go there to help out and to stay informed. Anywhere else you'd like to point everybody to go to keep up with you?
Sure. If you go to Twitter, I have a handle. It's Tim Hale, criminally funny J6er. I try to post a lot of the video I find. I expose a lot of informants. And also, I just recently reposted the footage I had on my own phone from January 6th. I think it's really important people realize, from the perspective, the eyes of someone who was actually there, what was actually happening, because it's not what CNN was saying for 3 years. So check it out. Thank you.
All right. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Tim Hale. We'll look forward to having you back on again very soon. Thanks for everything you do. And best of luck to you and everyone else that is dealing with the ramifications of this. This is State of the Nation on TNT.